Most people have no idea how much their grocery bill has changed in the last 2 years, not because they stopped paying attention, but because it happened slowly enough that each individual price increase felt like a rounding error. A box of pasta up 40 cents. A can of beans up 60. A bag of rice that used to cost $2 now sitting at $3.79. None of it felt like an emergency. All of it added up to something most households are only now starting to feel in a serious way. Here is what that actually means in practical terms. If you eat the way most Americans eat, a mix of fresh produce, pantry staples, and occasional processed food, your food budget is being quietly restructured by forces that have nothing to do with your choices. Supply chain adjustments made 18 months ago are hitting retail shelves right now. Fuel costs that spiked and never fully came down are baked into every distribution contract in the country, and the brands that absorb those costs for a while eventually pass them along all at once, which is why you'll notice a product you've bought for years suddenly costs 30% more without any obvious explanation. This video is not about fear. It is about a window that exists right now while certain categories of shelf-stable food are still priced low enough to make a specific calculation work. That calculation is this: 90 days of food security for one person for $30, not $30 a week. $30 total. One purchase. One afternoon, done. That number is real. It is achievable. And it is achievable specifically because of how most people think about food storage, which is wrong in a way that makes it seem far more expensive than it actually is. The mistake most people make is thinking about food storage the way they think about grocery shopping. They imagine stocking a pantry with the same variety they expect from a weekly trip to the store. That is not what this is. What this is a foundation layer. A caloric and nutritional base that means you are never more than a few additions away from eating well, regardless of what is happening outside. If you have never thought about food this way, the next few minutes are going to change how you see your pantry permanently. Stay with this, because the math gets interesting fast. Before we get into the list, there is one framework you need to understand. And it is the reason this works at $30 when most people would guess it costs 10 times that. The framework is caloric density per dollar, not nutrition per dollar, not taste per dollar, strictly calories per dollar. Because in a 90-day food supply, your first job is energy. Everything else, protein, micronutrients, variety, flavor, gets layered on top. Once you understand this hierarchy, the shopping list writes itself. The foundation of any serious food supply is one of 3 grains, and which one you choose changes the math slightly, but not dramatically. White rice is the most efficient. Not brown rice, white rice. The reason is storage life. Brown rice contains oils in the bran layer that go rancid within 6 to 12 months at room temperature. White rice, stored properly in a sealed container away from heat and light, lasts 25 to 30 years without meaningful nutritional degradation. The USDA has documented this. Military long-term ration research has confirmed it repeatedly. 25 years is not a selling point for most people, but 12 months absolutely is. And white rice clears that bar with decades to spare. The caloric math on white rice is straightforward. 1 pound of dry white rice contains roughly 1,600 calories. At current average retail prices, somewhere between 80 cents and $1.10 per pound depending on where you shop and what size bag you buy, you are looking at approximately $1 per 1,600 calories. For a baseline intake of 2,000 calories per day, you need roughly 1¼ pounds of dry rice. For 90 days, that is about 112 pounds, which sounds like an enormous amount until you realize that a 50-pound bag of white rice costs between $20 and $25 at most warehouse stores. 2 bags, $50. That is your caloric foundation for one person for 90 days. But we are not stopping at rice, and we are not spending $50, because the second layer of this system cuts the cost dramatically, while solving a problem that rice alone cannot solve. Dried lentils are, by most measures, the single most undervalued food item in any American grocery store. The average bag of dried lentils, 1 pound, sitting on the shelf next to the beans and grains, costs somewhere between $1 and $1.30. That bag contains roughly 1,600 calories and 49 grams of protein. For comparison, a can of tuna costs more per serving, requires refrigeration after opening, and delivers a fraction of the versatility. Lentils cook in 15 to 20 minutes from dry. No soaking required. This is not a minor convenience. It is the feature that separates lentils from virtually every other legume in terms of practical usability. Dried black beans need 8 to 12 hours of soaking and 45 minutes of cooking. Dried chickpeas need 12 hours of soaking and 90 minutes of cooking. Lentils need nothing except boiling water and about 20 minutes of your time. The protein content matters here for a specific reason that most food storage guides skip over. When you are eating from a stored supply for an extended period, your body's demand for protein does not decrease. It may actually increase, particularly under stress, disrupted sleep, or physical exertion. Research from nutritional science programs studying long-term dietary restriction consistently shows that protein adequacy is one of the strongest predictors of cognitive clarity and emotional stability during periods of food scarcity. Lentils at 49 grams per pound, for $1 and change, are doing work that no other item on this list can match at that price point. The combination of rice and lentils, in roughly equal caloric contribution, gives you a complete amino acid profile. This is the scientific basis behind the fact that rice and lentils, in various forms, have fed large populations across South Asia, the Middle East, and parts of Africa for centuries, without producing the protein deficiency diseases that plague populations eating grain alone. The combination is not a coincidence. It is nutritional engineering that predates the word nutrition. For $30, you can build a foundation of rice and lentils that covers the bulk of your caloric needs for 90 days per person. The exact split depends on how you want to balance cost, variety, and nutrition. But the math clears the budget with room left over. And that room is where the rest of this list lives. Oats. Specifically, rolled oats. The plain, unflavored, store-brand variety in the largest container available. A 42-ounce container of plain rolled oats contains roughly 2,400 calories and costs around $3 to $4. Oats add a morning meal option that rice and lentils cannot cover in the same way, and they add it cheaply. More importantly, oats have a soluble fiber profile that supports digestive regularity under stress, something that matters significantly when diet composition changes abruptly. Populations that shift suddenly to high-starch, low-variety diets often experience digestive disruption within the first week. Oats mitigate this. They also extend the texture and flavor variety of your morning, which brings us to the layer of this system that most guides completely underestimate: flavor infrastructure. This is where most food storage plans fail, not in calories, not in protein, but in palatability over time. There is a documented phenomenon called palate fatigue, studied extensively in military nutrition research and in research on long-duration space missions, that describes what happens to the human appetite when it encounters the same foods repeatedly over an extended period. The appetite begins to suppress itself. People eat less than they need, not because food is unavailable, but because their brain has downgraded the reward signal associated with eating. Energy intake drops. Mood destabilizes. Cognitive performance declines. All of this from eating the same nutritionally adequate food without variation. The solution is not variety in ingredients, it is variety in flavor. And flavor is extraordinarily cheap to store. Garlic powder. One small container costs under $2 and lasts years. It transforms rice, lentils, and oats from institutional food into something that resembles a meal. Cumin, paprika, oregano, chili flakes, any of these, bought in the smallest available size, cost between $1 and $2 and will survive years in a cool, dry cabinet. A bottle of hot sauce, a small container of salt. These items weigh almost nothing, cost almost nothing, and are doing more psychological work than any other category in this list. They are the difference between a food supply that sustains the body and one that sustains the person. Coconut oil or olive oil deserves its own mention here. Fat is the most calorie-dense macronutrient at 9 calories per gram, compared to 4 for carbohydrates and protein. A 16-ounce bottle of coconut oil contains roughly 3,200 calories and costs between $5 and $8. It does not require refrigeration. It has a 2-year shelf life at room temperature, and it does something that the rest of this list cannot do on its own. It makes food taste like food has fat in it, which is a sensory signal the human brain is specifically wired to find satisfying. Populations eating low-fat diets involuntarily, not by choice, but by scarcity, report significantly higher levels of hunger and dissatisfaction even when caloric intake is technically adequate. Fat satiety is real, and it is underweighted in almost every food storage guide written for general audiences. If you are still watching, here is where the list makes a turn that surprises most people. Peanut butter. Not as a luxury item, as a nutritional cornerstone. A 16-ounce jar of plain peanut butter, store brand, no added sugar, no frills, costs between $2 and $3 and contains roughly 2,700 calories and 64 grams of protein. It requires no cooking, no water, no fuel, no preparation of any kind. You can eat it directly from the jar with a spoon, and you are consuming meaningful nutrition in under 30 seconds. For anyone with children, this matters disproportionately. Children under stress eat poorly. They reject unfamiliar foods. They reject foods with changed textures. And they reject foods they associate with eating differently. Peanut butter is familiar. It is dense. It is accepted across age groups in a way that lentils, regardless of how they are prepared, simply are not. The fat content in peanut butter also serves the same role as the oil discussed earlier, but in a more portable, more immediately consumable form. Emergency management researchers who study household food security in disaster scenarios consistently identify peanut butter as the single most efficient emergency food item in terms of the ratio of caloric density to cost to ease of consumption. That is a very specific claim, and it is documented in the literature produced by university extension programs studying food security in the American South and Midwest. Now, the item that most people do not expect to see on this list. Instant dry milk, also sold as powdered whole milk, is one of the most nutritionally complete single ingredients available in any grocery store. And it is dramatically underrepresented in mainstream food storage conversations because it carries a reputation, largely undeserved, for tasting bad. That reputation comes from low-fat and skim versions, which do taste noticeably different from liquid milk. Whole milk powder is different. When reconstituted at the right ratio, and that ratio matters, it is indistinguishable to most people from fresh low-fat milk. More importantly, it does not need to be consumed as a beverage to justify its place in a stored supply. Dry whole milk is an ingredient. It turns oatmeal from a grain in water into a nutritionally dense breakfast. It turns a pan of rice into something closer to a risotto texture with the addition of nothing else. It extends caloric value per serving with protein and fat in the same addition. A 1-pound pouch of dry whole milk costs between $3 and $5 and contains protein, fat, calcium, and B vitamins in concentrations that most other pantry staples do not approach. Standard military ration specifications in at least 4 NATO countries include dry whole milk as a baseline component, not because fresh dairy is unavailable in logistics chains, but because dry whole milk performs a nutritional function per unit of weight and storage space that fresh dairy cannot replicate. The shelf life, stored in original sealed packaging away from heat and light, is typically 18 to 24 months. In a sealed container with an oxygen absorber, some studies document stability beyond 4 years without significant nutrient degradation. For a $30 per person food supply, 1 or 2 pouches of dry whole milk represent one of the highest nutritional returns per dollar in the entire list. Apple cider vinegar. This one earns its place for a different reason than everything else on this list. A 32-ounce bottle costs approximately $2 to $3. Its shelf life is indefinite. Vinegar does not spoil. Its function in a food storage context is primarily culinary. It is an acidulant that transforms the flavor profile of beans, lentils, rice dishes, and grain-based preparations in a way that nothing else replicates at a comparable price. The sharpness that vinegar adds to a dish is a palate reset. It clears taste fatigue in a way that simply adding salt or spice does not. Food writers and chefs describe this as brightening a dish, and the mechanism is real. The acidity elevates the perception of other flavors, which means that the same bowl of rice and lentils, finished with a small amount of vinegar and salt, tastes more distinct, more intentional, and more satisfying than the same bowl without it. There is also a secondary function that deserves mention without overclaiming. Vinegar has been used for centuries as a preservation agent and mild antimicrobial in food preparation contexts. This is historical fact, not health advice. Its use in pickling, fermentation, and food preservation predates refrigeration by millennia. Whether this has any meaningful relevance to a modern food storage scenario is a question for a professional context. What is not debatable is the culinary value at $2 a bottle. This is a good moment to make something clear about the $30 number, because some viewers watching this are doing the math and noticing that the items described already approach or exceed that figure depending on their local prices, and the quantities needed to truly cover 90 days for one person. The $30 number is a per-person allocation in a household context, meaning it applies most efficiently when purchased for multiple people simultaneously, because the largest cost per calorie savings in dry goods come from larger package sizes. A family of 4 buying this system spends roughly $120 total and gets dramatically better unit pricing on every item than a single person buying individual portions. That is not a trick in the math. It is how bulk food pricing works, and it is one of the structural advantages that households have over individuals in building food security at low cost. For a single person, the honest version of this number is closer to $35 to $45 at today's prices, depending on location and store choice. The principle holds. The math is real. The adjustments are minor. Here is how to prioritize the purchase if you are going to a store this week and you have $30 to $40 and you want to do this correctly. Start with the largest bag of white rice your budget and storage space allow. This is non-negotiable. Rice is the caloric anchor of the entire system. If you cannot afford anything else, rice first. Second priority is lentils. 2 to 3 pounds minimum per person, more if the budget allows. Third is peanut butter, 2 jars. Fourth is oats. Everything else, oil, spices, vinegar, dry milk, comes after those four categories are covered, because those four categories handle the bulk of caloric and protein requirements. The flavor and nutritional enhancement items are multipliers on a foundation. Without the foundation, the multipliers have nothing to work on. Storage is a practical consideration that most guides address too vaguely. The actual requirement is away from direct light, away from heat sources, in a space that stays below 75 degrees Fahrenheit consistently. This eliminates cars, garages in warm climates, and cabinets above stoves. It includes closets, underbed storage bins, and interior pantry shelves. You do not need a dedicated storage room. You need a cool, dark, stable temperature space, and most American homes have at least one of those. Transfer dry goods, rice, lentils, oats, from their original packaging into food-safe sealed containers if you are storing for more than 6 months. Mylar bags with oxygen absorbers extend shelf life significantly and cost very little. For a 90-day supply, original sealed packaging in a cool location is sufficient. The extra step of sealed containers matters most if you are building a supply meant to last 1 to 3 years. One category that this list has not addressed is water, and that omission is intentional but worth naming. Water storage and food storage are separate problems with separate solutions. All of the dry goods described here require water for preparation, which means a food supply without a water supply is incomplete. That is a separate video, a separate calculation, and a separate priority. What this list does is give you the caloric and nutritional foundation. Water access is not optional. It is parallel infrastructure that deserves its own treatment. There is something that happens to people who build even a modest food supply, even just 30 days of basics, that researchers who study household resilience document consistently. The anxiety related to food cost and food availability drops measurably. Not because the external situation changes, but because the psychological relationship to that situation changes. The person who has 90 days of food in their home is not watching grocery price increases with the same visceral alarm as the person who has 3 days of food and is fully dependent on the supply chain functioning perfectly every week. This is not a philosophical point. It is a measurable shift in stress physiology that has been documented in studies on household preparedness and psychological resilience. The food supply does not solve the problem. It changes your position relative to the problem, and that change has real effects on the decisions you make, the clarity with which you think, and the stability of your household when external conditions get difficult. $30. One afternoon. 90 days of foundation. That is the exchange on the table. If you made it here, you already know something about yourself that most people do not act on. You did not click away when the video stopped being dramatic. You stayed because the information was useful, and because somewhere in the back of your mind, you recognize that this kind of thinking, calm, specific, grounded in actual numbers, is exactly what has been missing from most of the content you have seen on this topic. The prepper channels that feel like they are selling you a bunker. The mainstream finance channels that treat food costs as a graph to discuss and never a problem to solve. The wellness accounts that tell you to buy organic everything and somehow spend less. None of them are talking to you the way this video tried to. And if that gap felt familiar before you clicked play, then you already know this channel is going to matter to you. This is not a channel about fear. It has never been. Fear is cheap to produce and expensive to live with. And the people who rely on it to hold your attention are not actually trying to help you think more clearly. They are trying to keep you anxious enough to keep watching. This channel operates on a different premise entirely. The premise is that you are a functional adult who is capable of making excellent decisions when you have accurate information, real numbers, and a framework that respects your intelligence. Everything built here starts from that assumption. You are not being talked down to. You are not being sold a product. You are being given the same analysis that someone would give a close friend who asked a serious question and deserved a serious answer. The topics that this channel returns to, over and over, are the ones that sit at the intersection of household economics, food security, and the kind of practical knowledge that used to be common and has somehow become niche. How supply chains actually work, and what that means for what you find on a shelf. Which categories of food are quietly being repriced and why. What the difference is between a food storage plan that lasts 6 weeks and one that lasts 6 months, and why that difference costs less than most people assume. How to think about nutrition not as a set of rules handed down from above, but as a system you can actually understand and use. These are not fringe topics. They are the questions that matter to anyone who is responsible for feeding a household and has started paying attention to what the world looks like right now. The next video in this series picks up exactly where this one leaves off. The foundation described here, the rice, the lentils, the oats, the peanut butter, the dry milk, the oil, the flavor infrastructure, is the floor. It is the layer that means you are never making food decisions from a place of zero options. The next layer is about building upward from that floor without losing the cost discipline that makes this system work. Specifically, which canned goods earn their place in a serious long-term supply, and which ones are marketing dressed up as preparedness. How to address the micronutrient gaps that a purely grain and legume foundation creates over time. What a realistic 6-month supply looks like for a household of different sizes, and how to build it incrementally over several months so that no single week feels like a significant expense. That video is already in production, and if you are subscribed, it arrives in your feed automatically. You do not have to remember to come back. It comes to you. Subscribing also means you are part of a specific kind of community that has formed around this channel, and it is worth describing what that community actually looks like, because it is not what you might expect from content in this space. It is not survivalists comparing gear. It is not people competing over who has the most months of food in their basement. It is mostly people who are somewhere in the early or middle stages of thinking seriously about household resilience. People who saw a grocery receipt last month and felt something shift, or who noticed a product they have bought for years was suddenly gone for 3 weeks without explanation, or who just had a quiet moment of realizing that their household runs on a very thin margin of preparedness, and they would like that margin to be wider. These are normal people making reasonable decisions. The comment section of this channel reflects that. Questions get real answers. Pushback gets engagement, not deletion. If you have watched this video and you have something to add, a correction, a regional price variation, an item this list missed, say it. That conversation makes the next video better, and the person reading your comment 6 months from now is going to benefit from what you wrote today. There is one more thing worth saying directly, and it connects back to something mentioned earlier in this video. The research on household resilience and the measurable drop in anxiety that comes with having a food supply in place. That effect is real, but it compounds. The first time you build a 30-day supply, you feel the shift. The first time a genuine disruption happens, a storm, a job interruption, a week where the budget got hit from 3 directions at once, and you realize your household is completely insulated from the food piece of that crisis. The relationship between you and that kind of stress changes permanently. You stop being reactive. You start being someone who made a decision ahead of time and is now watching the situation from a position of stability rather than scrambling. This channel exists to give you that position. Not through ideology, not through fear, not through selling you anything. Through information that is specific enough to act on and honest enough to trust. Everything presented in this video is based on publicly available data, retail pricing, caloric density figures, shelf life research, nutritional documentation from food science and military ration studies. It is not medical advice, and it is not a prescription for how any particular person should eat. If your health situation involves conditions that require dietary management, kidney function, metabolic disease, food allergies, anything that a clinician is already helping you navigate, bring a professional into this conversation before making significant changes to how your household eats over an extended period. The framework here is general. Your situation may not be. The information belongs to you. The decisions belong to you. And the professional relationship, if you have one, is exactly where questions about your specific health context should go. This is what this channel does. Every week, a different angle on the same core question. How do you build a household that is actually prepared for what the world looks like right now, without spending money you do not have, without becoming someone you do not recognize, and without living in a state of low-grade panic that exhausts you before anything even happens? If that question matters to you, you are already home. The foundation is simple. The math is honest. The window to act at these prices will not stay open indefinitely. What you do this week is up to you.